A huge MD-11 cargo plane from Korean Air is getting ready to take off from Shanghai Hongqiao Airport. It's a relatively short international flight, a cargo run between China and South Korea, no passengers, just 3 people on board and tons of goods in the hold. The plane's all set. In the cockpit, the crew's going through the usual cargo flight procedures. But in the first few minutes of the flight, a seemingly simple instruction is about to turn into a trap. Not because it's not just about what the controller says, but how that instruction is understood inside the cockpit. In aviation, a number might seem clear, 100, 3000, 4500, but a number without the right unit can change everything. April 15, 1999, Shanghai Hongqiao International Airport, China. It's 3:30 in the afternoon, and here Korean Air 6316 has just received the final weather update before heading to Korea. The weather in Shanghai Hongqiao wasn't perfect, but it wasn't bad either. Extreme scenario. Korean Air Cargo Flight 6366 was an international cargo route between Shanghai Hongqiao in China and Seoul Gimpo in South Korea. At that time, Gimpo was still one of the main airports serving the South Korean capital before Incheon took over years later as the country's main international gateway. The starting point was Shanghai Hongqiao International Airport, one of China's busiest airports. Its main runway, oriented north to south, was 3,400 meters long, and an elevation of just 3 meters above mean sea level. For a MD-11 freighter, a runway of that size provided enough margin for a heavy takeoff, as long as everything stayed within normal parameters. The takeoff would be from runway 18, meaning heading south. After takeoff, the plane had to enter Shanghai airspace, follow the departure instructions, and continue towards South Korea. The plane was a McDonnell Douglas MD-11F registration HL7373. The MD-11 was a 3-engine long-haul aircraft. Range developed as an evolution of the DC-10 with a modernized cockpit, more automation, and the ability to fly intercontinental passenger and cargo routes. The cargo version, the MD-11F, was especially valued for freight operations because of its range, payload capacity, and large internal volume. Its silhouette was unmistakable. 2 engines under the wings and a 3rd engine built into the base of the tail, a setup inherited from the DC-10 but updated for a more modern generation. The HL7373 was originally delivered in February 1992. It had logged 28,347 hours and 6 minutes of flight time and 4,463 cycles. The plane was delivered to Korean Air as a passenger aircraft and later converted into a cargo plane in 1996. There were 3 people on board, 2 pilots and a flight technician. There were no passengers since it was strictly a cargo flight. Captain Hansen Schill was 54 years old and had extensive experience. According to the official report, he had accumulated 12,098 flight hours, of which 4,856 hours were on the MD-11. The first officer, Park Bonsuk, was 35 years old. He'd been hired by Korean Air in 1994 and had found 826 flight hours, found 52 of which were on the MD-11. The third person on board, Peron Ki, was a flight technician or ground mechanic traveling with the crew to clear the flight in Shanghai. He was 48, had worked for Korean Air since 1978, and was certified to maintain several models, including the MD-11. At 3:46 p.m., the captain gave the order to start engine number 3. The rest of the steps followed after that. The usual routine. The MD-11 comes to life. The 3 Pratt & Whitneys and PW-44 sticks start making that deep, distinctive sound of a heavy trijet. Flight 6316 is still on the ground, but the first sign of confusion shows up even before the plane reaches the runway. The takeoff clearance includes maintaining 900 meters initially after departure. In China, altitude clearances in that area are given in meters. For a crew used to working in feet, that means they have to convert. Constant mental focus. The first officer reads the clearance, which includes turning after takeoff towards November Hotel Whiskey and maintaining 900 meters initially. The captain reacts with some hesitation. 900 meters. Then he tries to fit it into his usual mental framework. The doubt lingers in the cockpit. At 16:01, the Korean Air MD-11 starts its takeoff roll. They lifted off without issues and began their flight to South Korea. At 16:02, the tower hands the plane over to Shanghai departure on 119.75. The frequency is corrected during the transmission itself, and the first officer tries to respond. At the same time, concern starts to build in the cockpit. The plane isn't making the initial turn as planned. Why isn't it turning? The captain asks. Things get tense in the cockpit. They're trying to figure out why the lateral navigation isn't working like they expected. The captain asks, "Did you activate the direct?" The first officer replies, "Yes. The workload just went up a notch. You have to take off, check in with departure, handle the turn, clear the setup, confirm the route, and keep the right altitude." All this happens in seconds. At 16:03, Shanghai departure calls the flight. Korean Air 6356, turn left now, heading straight to November Hotel Whiskey. Climb and maintain FA 500 meters. FA 500 meters, which is about 4,900 feet. The first officer reads back the instruction, but asks them to repeat the altitude. Shanghai departure, please repeat. Climb and maintain 1,500 meters. The captain says a key phrase, maintain 3,000 feet. Right now, the plane's at about 900 meters, which is roughly 3,000 feet. To the captain, that seems to be the altitude he has in mind. But the departure clearance has already been updated. It's not to stay at 900 meters, but to climb to 1,000. And 3,000 feet is almost 5,000. The tower notices the plane hasn't clearly responded to the new altitude instruction, and still isn't doing what's expected. A few seconds later, the instruction is repeated. Korean Air 6316, climb and maintain 500 meters. The first officer reads back, 1,500 meters. Korean Air 6316. The correct phrase is on the radio, 100 meters. The plane keeps climbing. The crew is still busy with the turn. The captain's still worried about how the plane's responding sideways. What's going on with this? Seems to be what he's saying. The tone shows tension. Not exactly panic, but definitely a cockpit filled with a sense that the plane isn't doing what it's supposed to. In those seconds, the MD-11 keeps moving away from runway 18. The city lies below, partially visible, covered by low clouds and mist. The plane has finally passed 3,000 feet. It keeps climbing, but at some point during this, the pilot's frame of reference starts to shift, and they dangerously begin talking in 100 feet instead of 1,500 meters. At 16:04, radar shows the plane around 970 meters, about 3,200 feet. It continues climbing. The actual clearance is still 100 meters. The plane crosses 1,000 meters, then 100, then 10,000. In feet, the altimeter is getting close to 4,000. A few seconds later, the MD-11 passes about 1,310 meters. It's close to the right altitude. Just about 190 meters left to reach the authorized 1,100. But something suddenly happens in the cockpit. The first officer warns the captain that the altitude should be 100, not nearly 4,900 feet like they are now. That's a huge difference. In seconds, the flight goes from being close to its assigned altitude to suddenly looking dangerously high to the crew. The captain gets scared when he sees the reading and reacts quickly, pushing the MD-11's nose suddenly drops sharply. It's not a gentle correction of a few degrees, it's a violent change in attitude. The plane, which had been climbing until then, suddenly starts going down. There are thuds and vibrations in the cockpit, like loose parts or dashboard panels shaking from the violent shift. The plane isn't just adjusting altitude anymore, it's falling. The nose is down, speed is picking up, and the altitude is dropping fast. Terrifying speed. The crew is trying to balance the controls, but the plane's on a really aggressive path. It's diving fast. The city's right below. Buildings, streets, construction sites all rushing closer. The first officer shouts, "Nose up, nose up!" It's a desperate call, the right order, but too late. The MD-11 keeps plummeting and the GPWS starts sounding warnings. A second later, the autopilot kicks in or tries to, but it's too late. The altitude is barely any, the speed is super high, and the flight path is headed straight for the ground. At 16:35, just 3 minutes after starting the takeoff roll, Korean Air Cargo 636 crashes into a construction site near Sinhuan in the Minhang district, southwest of Hongqiao Airport. The impact is catastrophic. The MD-11 slams nose first into the ground, at about 20 to 40 degrees with the wings almost level. The speed shown on an instrument found among the wreckage is stuck around 400 knots, about 740 kilometers per hour. The force of the crash gouges out a huge crater and almost completely destroys the plane. The shockwave shakes the area. Temporary structures from a nearby construction site collapse. Heavy pieces, parts of the plane, and some of the cargo are thrown forward along the impact direction. Nearby shops and homes get damaged. Power and other supplies are cut off. Water, electricity, and gas. The crash was so violent that it was even recorded by Shanghai's seismic monitoring system. The final toll of the accident wasn't just the 3 men aboard the MD-11. All 3 crew members of the Korean cargo flight 63 Sung Six died on impact. But the force of the crash also hit the construction site and nearby buildings hard. On the ground, 5 more people died, bringing the official death toll to 8. Also, dozens of people were injured. The official report lists 4 seriously hurt and 36 with minor injuries, while other sources put the total at 42 injured. So, it was both an air and urban tragedy, a cargo plane that crashed just minutes after taking off, turning a work area in Shanghai into a massacre scene. In less than 4 minutes, what started as a routine cargo flight between Shanghai and Seoul went from a seemingly normal takeoff to a nearly vertical crash, an urban area. There wasn't enough time to declare an emergency. No time to get back to the airport. No time to fully grasp what was happening. Just a chain of orders, doubts, back and forths, automatic reactions, overload, and a final response that turned a normal climb into a descent that was impossible to recover from. What had happened? What did the final report say about this disastrous flight? The investigation into the Korean Air Cargo Flight 63 Six accident began right after the crash. Since the accident happened on Chinese soil, the investigation was handled by China's Civil Aviation Authority, with representatives from South Korea and the United States involved. Organizations and companies like KCAB, the NTSB, the FAA, Boeing, Pratt & Whitney, and Korean Air, along with other manufacturers linked to the plane systems, also helped out. One of the first goals was to rule out the most serious or obvious causes, like an explosion mid-flight, sabotage, a pilot error, or a major mechanical failure. The wreckage was badly fragmented, but the way the debris was spread out showed the plane stayed intact until it hit the ground. No signs of explosives, sabotage, or any critical failure in the engines, hydraulic systems, or flight controls were found before the crash. The official report itself states that the investigation ruled out an explosion. A sabotage or air traffic control error was ruled out as the cause of the accident. The main issue was that the plane was completely destroyed. The data recorder and QR were badly damaged, and although fragments were recovered, it wasn't possible to get any useful information from them despite efforts by the NTSB and the manufacturer. However, they did manage to recover the cockpit voice recorder, and that recording was crucial because it helped piece together the final minutes of the flight and understand what was happening inside the cockpit. Based on that recording, radar data, the wreckage, and later simulations, the investigators came to a clear conclusion. The crew got the altitude mixed up. Air traffic control had cleared the flight to climb to 100 meters, which is about 4,900 feet. But in the cockpit, that clearance was taken as 100 feet. So, when the plane was climbing correctly toward the altitude authorized, the crew came to believe they were about 3,000 feet above the allowed altitude. That confusion triggered the fatal maneuver. According to the investigation, the first officer mistakenly communicated the altitude, and the captain reacted by sharply pushing the controls forward. The MD-11 went from a normal climb to a very rapid descent. When the crew realized the plane was dropping too fast, they tried to recover, but there wasn't enough altitude left. The plane hit the ground with its wings level. The nose tilted down between 20 and 40 degrees, flying at about 400 knots. Investigators also looked into whether the descent was caused by a failure in the horizontal stabilizer, elevator lock, or control issue. But tests and simulations didn't support those ideas. The flight pattern, recorded alerts, and the plane's behavior pointed more toward a sudden control input made by the pilot. The crew faced a sudden uncontrollable malfunction. The report even says they couldn't recreate the accident scenario with an out-of-control stabilizer or elevators. The most likely cause was a loss of awareness about their altitude. It wasn't just a simple mix-up between meters and feet. It was a chain of factors. Working in a setting that used meters, a crew more used to feet, unresolved doubts in the cockpit, and a heavy workload. Problems following lateral navigation, and an overly aggressive reaction when they thought they were way above the authorized altitude. As a result, the safety recommendations focused mainly on training. The report called for Korean Air to train its pilots to properly convert meters to feet, and to strengthen cockpit discipline in air traffic control environments, where altitude clearances are given in meters. The accident also left an important lesson, a broader scope for international aviation. Standardization matters. Thanks for sticking around till the end, friends. Before I say goodbye,